The galaxy had never seen anything like Princess Salith. In the grand halls of the Zephyrian Empire, where towering spires shimmered with light that could be seen from orbit, she walked with a calm grace that seemed impossible to ignore. Her people whispered her name with both reverence and fear. She was young, yet her eyes held centuries of wisdom. Her father, the Emperor, had prepared her for the duty of choosing a mate, one whose strength, power, and influence could ensure the Empire's dominance for generations. And yet, she had turned them all away. The strongest warlords from the farthest reaches of the galaxy had come, each bringing fleets of starships, armies of genetically engineered soldiers, and gifts worth entire planets. They arrived with great ceremony, each confident that they would finally claim the hand of the princess who refused all. Yet each left humiliated, rejected, or silently escorted from the palace with their pride shattered. Salith did not need to explain herself. Her silence was her answer. Most saw her as cruel or capricious. Some whispered that she feared commitment, or that she could not be swayed by the mere promise of power. But those who watched closely understood something the others did not. Salith was searching not for wealth or glory, but for something rarer, a soul unafraid of truth, one that measured worth not in conquests but in quiet strength. Earth's envoy arrived last. In the grand list of alien empires, humanity was small, barely capable of traveling beyond their solar system. The humans who came were few, unarmed, and seemingly unprepared to impress. The Emperor had nearly dismissed them as a courtesy, placing them at the bottom of the guest list. Yet he allowed them entry, curious to see what a planet so far behind in the stars might produce. The human chosen was Elias Ward, an engineer and historian who had spent his life studying the rise and fall of civilizations. He was not tall or imposing. His voice was soft, and his manner was quiet, almost unremarkable among beings who had evolved to tower over cities or manipulate matter with thought. Elias carried no weapons. He wore no armor, no insignia of rank. Only a small datapad with notes on Zephyrian history and customs rested in his hands. When he entered the grand hall, Salith noticed him immediately. He did not bow excessively. He did not try to catch her eye or flaunt his accomplishments. He simply observed, stepping lightly, as if he belonged there by right of presence alone. The other suitors scoffed. The Andran warlord from the Molari system muttered that humans were weak and fragile, unworthy of even polite consideration. A telepathic envoy from the Zelari Empire whispered rumors to one another, imagining what powers might lurk beneath the humans' calm demeanor. But Salith did not care what they thought. She watched as Elias moved among the crowd, speaking only when necessary. When a diplomat asked him to demonstrate a technology or reveal military capability, he answered honestly, admitting the limitations of humanity. He did not attempt to exaggerate, nor did he seek pity. He spoke of humanity's failures, but also of their persistence, their capacity to learn, and their hope. Salith found herself intrigued. She had grown tired of suitors who spoke of conquest, power, or dominance. She had grown weary of displays designed to intimidate. Elias spoke in a way that was unfamiliar, straightforward, calm, and without arrogance. He admitted the weaknesses of his species, yet he did not bow in defeat. He was not afraid to speak the truth, and in that he was unlike anyone she had ever met. The hall was filled with grandeur, towering ceilings, light panels that shifted color with mood, and fountains of liquid crystal that danced in midair. The suitors strutted, made speeches, and displayed exotic creatures, rare metals, and dangerous technologies. Each hoped to catch her attention, each hoped to impress her with force or beauty. Yet Salith's gaze kept returning to the quiet human at the edge of the hall, scribbling notes on his datapad, nodding politely and listening. Days passed. The suitors began to grow desperate. The warlord from Molari built a show of strength outside the palace, firing plasma cannons in a display meant to dazzle, only to have the princess remain unimpressed. The telepaths attempted to probe her mind, searching for weakness, but she deflected them with practiced ease. Each display of power once meant to sway her only made her more certain of her desire. She would choose not for strength, but for depth. Elias, however, did not seek her favor. He observed the palace and the people within it with genuine curiosity. He asked questions about the Empire's history, the lives of ordinary citizens, the challenges of governing a vast civilization. His questions were simple yet perceptive, revealing insights that few, even among the Empire's advisors, had considered. In one small moment, Salith saw him interacting with the palace staff. A servant had dropped a tray of delicate instruments, and without hesitation, Elias bent to help, gently righting the instruments and reassuring the servant. There was no condescension, no expectation of reward, only quiet kindness. That evening, the suitors gathered in a grand chamber for a formal demonstration of wisdom and skill. One by one, they showcased their abilities, bending matter, projecting illusions, commanding robotic armies. Elias stepped forward with no such demonstration. He spoke of Earth's history, of civilizations that had risen and fallen, of the mistakes humans had made and the lessons they had learned. He spoke not of power, but of understanding, patience, and resilience. The room fell silent. Some laughed, seeing it as a feeble attempt to compete. Others whispered to one another, curious if there was hidden meaning. Salith listened with growing admiration. Here was a being who understood something fundamental, that true power did not always lie in force or fear. As the days turned into weeks, the palace staff began to notice subtle changes in the princess's behavior. She spent time walking the gardens alone, contemplating Elias' words. She asked questions in private, testing his reasoning, challenging him gently, and yet finding herself satisfied with his answers. Unlike the other suitors, he did not attempt to deceive her, did not flaunt what he did not have, and did not attempt to manipulate her perception. The political advisors grew anxious. A human. They whispered among themselves. An ordinary, fragile species? It would be unprecedented, even scandalous, for a princess to consider such a choice. The emperor, though silent, observed carefully. He had hoped for a strategic alliance, but even he could not deny the calm certainty in Salith's eyes when she spoke of the human. One evening in the quiet of the observation balcony overlooking the twin suns of Zephyra, Salith approached Elias. He was sketching star charts, recording observations of planetary rotations. She did not announce her presence, she simply watched for a moment. "You speak differently from the others," she said softly. Elias looked up, startled but not frightened. "I speak as I can," he replied. "I have little else to offer. Power can win battles, but understanding can prevent them. Humanity has failed many times, but we have survived because we learn, because we try again, and because we refuse to harm others if we can avoid it." Other suitors would have called it weakness. She recognized it as courage, resilience, and wisdom. In the following days, the palace became a stage for contrast. The galaxy's mightiest species attempted to impress, dominate, or deceive. Elias simply continued his studies, his observations, and his quiet conversations with those around him. The difference was stark, undeniable, and growing impossible to ignore. As Part 1 drew to a close, the suitors had grown frustrated, the Emperor had grown cautious, and Salith had grown intrigued. All other beings who had hoped to claim her hand in marriage were still attempting to force their way into her favor, yet none had succeeded. Only the quiet human, the one who did not shout or display or command attention, had captured her curiosity. For the first time in her life, Princess Salith felt a spark of hope, not for a political alliance, not for power, not for a display of strength, but for something deeper, something rare. And as the twin suns of Zephyra set over the horizon, she wondered quietly whether she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. The days passed, and the palace buzzed with a strange mixture of excitement and tension. Each suitor had come to impress Princess Salith, yet none could earn even a flicker of her favor. They brought gifts worth the equivalent of entire planets, showcased technologies that could obliterate moons, and flaunted armies that could conquer star systems. But all these displays only revealed arrogance, greed, and hunger for power. Salith found herself increasingly tired of their posturing, their boasting, and their insistence that dominance equaled worth. Elias, however, remained quietly present. He moved through the palace with gentle efficiency, observing and recording, never pushing to be noticed. He asked questions about the architecture, the history of Zephyra, the lives of ordinary citizens, and the delicate balance of politics that kept the empire intact. When asked about Earth, he spoke simply and honestly, describing humanity's achievements and failures alike. He did not claim superiority, nor did he hide humanity's flaws. Instead, he described a people who endured, adapted, and learned from their mistakes. Salith watched him carefully. It was remarkable how he drew attention without trying, how his calm manner contrasted sharply with the displays of power surrounding him. She saw that he treated everyone with respect, whether noble or servant. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was with thought and clarity. Even the smallest gestures, the way he helped a servant carry a heavy tray or adjusted a misaligned holographic display, revealed a consistency that none of the other suitors possessed. The other suitors noticed him as well. At first, they laughed, calling him weak and insignificant. The Andran warlord, who had once demanded that the princess recognize his army as the mightiest in the quadrant, openly mocked Elias. "Do you plan to fight with words, human? Your kind is fragile. You would fall if a breeze struck you." His quiet demeanor only fueled the frustration of the other suitors, and it intrigued Salith. Here was a being who did not seek power or status, yet possessed a strength that was unmistakable in its subtlety. One evening, a challenge was announced. The emperor had grown concerned about the growing tension among the suitors and sought to test their wisdom and character. He proposed a simulated crisis, a collapsing star system at the edge of the empire. Each suitor would be given the task of devising a solution to save the system's planets and inhabitants. The outcome would not only demonstrate competence, but also reveal the values and priorities of each candidate. The suitors prepared with urgency. The Molari warlord designed a fleet capable of moving entire planets into safer orbits, ignoring the lives of the inhabitants if they slowed his plan. A Zelari telepath proposed to use psychic manipulation to evacuate only those deemed worthy, leaving the rest to perish. Each plan was ambitious, ruthless, and centered on asserting control rather than preserving life. Elias, in contrast, approached the challenge differently. He studied the system carefully, noting the orbits of planets, the composition of atmospheres, and the potential for natural stabilization. He proposed a plan that required patience, coordination, and careful use of existing technologies. He suggested combining gravitational stabilizers with environmental shields, redirecting minor asteroids to adjust planetary motion, and organizing cooperative evacuations that ensured every life could be preserved without destroying the system. When he presented his plan to the Emperor and Princess Salith, the room fell silent. The other suitors snorted derisively, calling it inefficient and slow. "You waste time," the Molari warlord said. "We could achieve the goal in hours if we act with force. My plan takes longer, but it ensures the survival of all beings in the system, not just the ones we choose." His approach was quiet, deliberate, and considerate, yet it demonstrated more skill and insight than any display of power could. The simulation began. The other suitors executed their plans aggressively. Molari's fleet moved planets at breakneck speed, causing atmospheric collapse on some, while others narrowly avoided collision. The Zelari's telepaths evacuated only selected populations, leaving chaos behind. When Elias' plan was enacted, it required careful coordination, constant adjustments, and the cooperation of several other minor species. Yet in the end, it worked flawlessly. Every planet remained intact. Every inhabitant survived. No one was left behind. The contrast was stark. The Emperor frowned, the other suitors seethed with embarrassment, and Salith's eyes shone with quiet approval. For the first time, she saw clearly the depth of the human's character. Elias had no weapons, no armies, no fleets capable of destroying star systems. Yet he had accomplished what the galaxy's mightiest could not. He had saved lives without harming anyone. In the following days, the palace grew tense. The other suitors plotted, whispered, and complained. How could a human so seemingly powerless surpass them? How could someone with no political influence or military might demonstrate such competence? Their frustration grew, and with it, the perception of Elias as a threat, not to power, but to their pride. Salith, however, spent her time in quiet observation. She met with Elias in private, asking questions, challenging his reasoning, and discussing ethics, governance, and the philosophy of leadership. Each conversation revealed new layers of his intelligence and patience. He spoke not to impress, but to clarify. He admitted mistakes, acknowledged uncertainty, and always considered the broader consequences of any action. The palace staff began to notice changes as well. Those who once served quietly now found themselves drawn to Elias' calm presence. Soldiers, scholars, and attendants alike saw him not as a guest to be ignored, but as someone who treated each person as worthy of respect. Even the most cynical advisors began to soften, recognizing the subtle influence he had on those around him. One evening, a minor emergency occurred. A laboratory experiment went wrong, threatening to release toxic gases into a wing of the palace. The other suitors panicked, ordering armed guards to control the situation. Elias, however, calmly assessed the problem. Using available tools, he redirected the gas, created temporary barriers, and guided the staff and other guests to safety. No one was harmed, and the crisis ended quietly, efficiently, and without chaos. Salith watched from a distance. She realized that Elias did not seek recognition or reward. He acted out of principle, not ambition. In the galaxy of power-hungry rulers and violent conquerors, this was a strength unlike any she had encountered. The other suitors became desperate. Some attempted to sabotage him, spreading rumors of incompetence or accusing him of espionage. But Elias did not respond with anger. He continued his work quietly, letting results speak for themselves. His calm resilience only drew Salith closer. She admired his refusal to engage in petty conflict, his dedication to truth, and his courage to act even when he had no authority or power to command respect. The palace began to feel different. Where there had been tension and posturing, there was now a subtle shift. People began to listen, to cooperate, and to question the methods that had always been accepted as necessary. Elias' presence, quiet and unassuming, was transforming the palace environment without a single speech or display of force. Salith realized something profound. The human was not trying to win her favor. He was simply being himself. And in that, he had revealed something she had been searching for all along, a strength that was quiet, patient, ethical, and enduring. As Part 2 drew toward its close, the simulated crisis had concluded, and the palace was quiet in the aftermath. The other suitors had been humiliated by their own failures and by the undeniable success of a being they considered weak. The emperor, though proud and stern, could not deny the human's capability. Salith, standing on the balcony and looking at the stars, felt a strange mixture of relief and excitement. For the first time, she understood that the measure of worth was not in power, nor in dominance, nor in intimidation. It was in courage, integrity, and the willingness to act rightly, even when no one was watching. Elias, unaware of the weight of the moment, returned to his notes, quietly studying the stars and recording observations. He had no desire for recognition, only for understanding and for action guided by principle. And in that quiet, unassuming manner, he had begun to capture the attention of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, not with weapons, not with grand gestures, but with humanity itself. It was clear to Salith that the days ahead would not be about displays of strength, but about choices, ethics, and the courage to act with integrity. And she found herself hoping, against all convention, that this human, so quiet and simple, might continue to surprise her in ways no other suitor could. For the first time, she considered the impossible. Perhaps, just perhaps, the one who would capture her favor would not be the strongest, the most cunning, or the most feared. Perhaps it would be the human, the quiet observer, the one who had already proven that true strength could exist in silence, patience, and moral clarity. And as the twin suns set once more over the spires of Zephyra, a subtle change began to take hold, not just in the palace, not just in Salith, but in the very sense of what it meant to be powerful in a galaxy ruled by fear and ambition. Elias did not yet know it, but the future of the Empire, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was quietly turning toward him. The success of the simulation had changed the mood in the palace, but it had also sparked jealousy and resentment among the suitors. The Molari warlord, the Zelari telepaths, and other powerful beings could not bear that a human, considered weak and insignificant, had outshone them without strength, without fleets, without weapons. The Emperor, aware of the growing tension, decided to make a final assessment, a real challenge, one that would test not just intelligence, but character, courage, and adaptability under true pressure. A nearby star system had become unstable. A massive star, once dormant for centuries, was beginning to collapse. Planets that orbited it risked being swallowed by gravity, their atmospheres stripped, their inhabitants destroyed. The Emperor declared that the suitors must respond immediately. This was no simulation. Lives were at stake. Failure would not be forgiven. The suitors rushed to prepare. The warlords activated fleets. The Zelari attempted psychic coordination across planets, and others called in reinforcements from their empires. They spoke loudly, commanding, threatening, and using every advantage they possessed. But Elias, as always, remained calm. He reviewed data from satellites and probes, examined the stars' behavior, and calculated the orbits of each planet. Salith observed from the observation deck, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched the chaos unfold. The other suitors acted with urgency, but in their haste they overlooked small details. They prioritized speed over safety, dominance over preservation. Elias, in contrast, seemed to consider every factor, every potential consequence, every life. The first planet at risk was a densely populated world rich in resources. The Molari warlord sent a fleet to stabilize it, moving massive planetary shields into place. But in his haste, the shields caused massive tidal forces, leading to earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and millions of lives at risk. The Zelari telepaths evacuated only selected citizens, choosing those they considered politically valuable, while ignoring thousands who had no power or status. Elias acted differently. He did not command armies or psychic forces. He coordinated communication between the planets, sharing precise calculations on orbital adjustments, gravitational stabilizers, and energy redistribution. He designed a plan that balanced the delicate forces at play, stabilizing the planet's orbits without endangering life. When the first reports came in, it was clear that Elias' method, though slower, was the only one that preserved the populations intact. Salith felt a flicker of admiration as she watched him, quiet and composed, guiding the system through disaster without arrogance or display. But not all were impressed. The Molari warlord was furious. "This human dares to outthink me?" he roared. His armies continued to act recklessly, causing more damage than they prevented. The Zelari muttered among themselves, telepathically attacking each other in frustration, yet Elias remained focused. He spoke to each planet's leaders, offering guidance and advice. He acted as a teacher, a strategist, and a guardian all at once. Salith could not help but smile. The human was not trying to win favor or claim glory. He was acting out of principle to save lives and minimize harm. It was a quality she had not seen in any other being, no matter how powerful. The crisis escalated. A small moon, caught in the star's increasing gravitational pull, threatened to collide with two inhabited planets. The Molari fleet attempted to destroy it, but the explosion sent debris flying in all directions. Panic spread. The Zelari telepaths tried to evacuate only the wealthy and influential, leaving the rest behind. Elias quickly devised a new solution. Using a combination of tractor beams, orbital adjustments, and redirected asteroid paths, he guided the moon into a stable orbit that would not threaten the planets. The maneuver required precise timing, cooperation from the planets, governments, and careful management of energy resources. It worked. The moon's path stabilized and the planets were safe. No one was harmed. The other suitors could only watch, speechless. They had relied on power and fear, on overwhelming force, and yet it had failed. The human, with nothing more than knowledge, patience, and careful planning, had succeeded where the strongest had faltered. Salith felt a deep respect for Elias. He had demonstrated what she had suspected all along, that true strength was not measured by armies, weapons, or dominance, but by the courage to act rightly, the wisdom to foresee consequences, and the empathy to protect life. As the crisis continued, the suitors grew desperate. Some attempted sabotage, sending false information to disrupt Elias' calculations. Others tried to manipulate him, offering bribes or threats. But Elias remained unshaken. He verified every piece of information, double-checked every calculation, and adjusted his plan accordingly. His calmness under pressure inspired those around him, and even some of the palace staff began to follow his guidance rather than the frantic commands of the other suitors. The emperor watched closely, his stern expression unreadable. He had expected displays of power, but what he saw was something different, a quiet, steady mind guiding a dangerous situation to resolution. It was a demonstration of competence and character that no display of strength could match. By the time the crisis ended, the results were undeniable. The planets had been stabilized, the populations preserved, and the threat of the collapsing star neutralized. Elias had achieved this without a single act of aggression, without weapons or fleets, and without coercion. His success was complete, and yet he made no claim to glory. Salith approached him in the aftermath. The observation deck was quiet, the stars reflecting in her eyes. "You did not seek recognition," she said softly. "You acted because it was right." This human, so ordinary in appearance, had displayed a courage and wisdom that far exceeded any suitor who relied on fear or force. He had proven, in the most direct way possible, that humanity possessed a type of strength that the galaxy often underestimated. The other suitors, meanwhile, were in disarray. Some tried to argue to claim that circumstances had favored Elias or that luck had played a role. But the emperor was silent. He did not need to speak. The results spoke for themselves. Elias had succeeded where the strongest, most powerful beings had failed. Over the following days, the palace began to feel different. Staff and advisors spoke of Elias with respect. Even the most arrogant suitors began to recognize, begrudgingly, that brute strength was not always sufficient. The quiet human had revealed a new standard, one where intelligence, patience, and moral clarity mattered more than weapons, armies, or status. Salith spent time observing Elias in small, private moments. She watched as he helped a young student repair a small laboratory drone, spoke gently to a frightened servant, and guided a junior officer through a complex orbital calculation. Each act was small, almost imperceptible, but together they formed a pattern of thoughtfulness and competence that none of the other suitors had displayed. It became clear to her that Elias did not seek admiration, power, or favor. He acted from principle, from understanding, and from a desire to protect and preserve. This was a type of courage the galaxy often overlooked, but it was one she found impossible to ignore. In quiet moments when the stars reflected off the palace windows, Salith considered the implications. A human, a being considered weak and insignificant by almost everyone, had outshone the galaxy's mightiest. He had done so without threat, without violence, without coercion. And in doing so, he had revealed something extraordinary. That strength could exist quietly, patiently, and ethically. The other suitors, sensing their own failures and the growing admiration for Elias, became more aggressive in their attempts to win favor. Some spread rumors, accusing him of deceit or trickery. Others tried to challenge him to duels or debates. But Elias continued to act as he had from the beginning, calmly, honestly, and with a focus on what was right rather than what was expected. The palace, once filled with tension and competition, now felt a subtle shift. Those who had once followed only the loudest voices began to listen. Cooperation replaced conflict, careful planning replaced rash action, and the quiet human became a central figure not because of ambition, but because of his ability to act rightly in a chaotic galaxy. Salith could not help but feel a growing admiration. She had seen many suitors, many displays of power, and yet none had demonstrated the type of courage and wisdom Elias had shown. He had faced challenges not with weapons or threats, but with thought, patience, and a steadfast commitment to what was right. And as Part 3 drew to a close, the sense of possibility grew. Elias had not only survived the test of the collapsing star system, but he had also proven a truth that few in the galaxy would admit: that humans, underestimated and dismissed, possessed a type of strength that could shape the future in ways that armies and fleets could not. Salith watched him one last time that evening, standing quietly in the observation hall, studying the stars and taking notes. She realized that the days ahead would be filled with challenges far greater than this one. Rival suitors would not give up easily. Political intrigue, sabotage, and deception were inevitable. Yet for the first time, she believed that humanity, represented by this quiet, unassuming man, might be able to rise above it all. Not through force, not through dominance, but through courage, wisdom, and the quiet strength of doing what was right. And in that quiet moment, Princess Salith understood something she had never fully realized. Sometimes, the most extraordinary power is not the one that shouts the loudest, but the one that acts with integrity, patience, and heart. Elias, unaware of the weight of the recognition he had earned, continued to study the stars, calmly, patiently, quietly changing the course of a galaxy that had underestimated humanity from the very beginning. The calm after the star system crisis lasted only a few days. The palace seemed quieter, but that silence hid growing unrest. The other suitors could not forgive the human for outshining them. They had lost prestige, suffered humiliation, and now faced a princess who quietly admired a species they considered weak. Their whispers turned to plotting, their rivalries into outright scheming. One evening, as Elias worked alone in a laboratory filled with instruments and holographic displays, alarms blared throughout the palace. The main security network had detected a breach. Unauthorized drones were moving through the halls, tampering with systems and attempting to access sensitive data. Panic spread among the staff. The other suitors, rather than helping, accused one another, their factions forming instantly into chaos. Elias did not panic. He stood calmly, analyzing the data streaming in. The breach was sophisticated, unlike anything humans had encountered before, yet the solution was not brute force. He needed precision, observation, and quick thinking. He accessed the palace's security matrix, tracing the drones' movements. They were heading toward the core data vault, a place where centuries of Zephyrian knowledge and planetary records were stored. If the intruders succeeded, countless lives and histories would be at risk. While others shouted and ordered guards, Elias quietly organized a plan. He repurposed idle maintenance drones, programming them to intercept the intruders' devices without causing explosions or harm. He rerouted power to reinforce doors and adjusted environmental controls to slow the intruders' progress. The Molari warlord demanded that the security teams fire on the drones. "Kill them! Destroy the intruders!" he shouted, but Elias shook his head. "We do not need to destroy anything. We need to protect what is here, and we can do it without unnecessary harm." He was saving the palace without risking lives, a feat none of them had anticipated. Hours passed, each one tense and measured. The intruders were clever, adapting quickly to the palace's defenses, but Elias adapted faster. He used simple mechanical tricks, misdirection, and precise timing. The maintenance drones acted like a silent army, intercepting intruders one by one and guiding them out of critical areas. No one was injured, no systems were damaged beyond repair. Finally, the last intruder was stopped. The palace system stabilized and the emergency alarm ceased. The other suitors were in disbelief. They had assumed force was the only solution, yet the human had achieved the same outcome, without destruction, without violence, and without fear. Salith descended to the laboratory. Her eyes were wide with admiration. "You did not panic," she said softly. "You did not lash out, you simply solved it." "Chaos does not require chaos to fix it," he said. "We only need observation, reasoning, and patience. Panic is often the enemy of good solutions." Elias had proven something that was difficult for the galaxy to accept. A species considered weak could outthink the strongest. The palace staff began to speak of him differently. Where once they had whispered about his quietness or simplicity, they now spoke of his skill, his intelligence, and his composure under pressure. Young officers and scholars asked for guidance, and he provided it patiently. Servants and staff found him approachable and fair. He had won their trust not by claiming authority, but by demonstrating reliability and kindness. The suitors, however, were not content to watch quietly. Their resentment festered. They convened in secret chambers, plotting further sabotage. They spread rumors about Elias, claiming he was manipulating Salith, claiming he had hidden weapons or secret power. They attempted to interfere with his work, to distract him during meetings, and even to isolate him from the princess. Elias noticed some of these attempts, but did not confront them directly. He continued to act as he had before, calmly, efficiently, and with focus on what was important. When a minor system malfunction was discovered in a nearby research wing, he repaired it immediately, preventing a cascade failure that could have damaged experimental equipment and endangered the staff. Salith observed these actions quietly. She understood more than anyone that the human's strength was not in display, not in intimidation, not in authority. It was in the ability to act rightly, to solve problems under pressure, and to inspire others by example. She began to see him not only as competent, but as extraordinary in ways the galaxy did not recognize. One evening, as the palace quieted and most of the suitors retired to their quarters, Elias found himself walking the gardens. Salith joined him without announcement. The twin moons cast a soft light, reflecting in the fountains and illuminating the delicate flora. "You remain calm no matter what happens," she said. "Even when the palace is under attack, when others fail, you act as if nothing can shake you. But you rely on reasoning, patience, and understanding." He had principles, courage, and a sense of responsibility that transcended the usual measures of power in the galaxy. The next morning, the palace received word of another disturbance. A nearby trade hub had been sabotaged, its resources threatened, and lives endangered. The other suitors immediately mobilized fleets and troops, demanding immediate action. Elias, however, requested detailed information first. He analyzed logistics, population data, and potential consequences before suggesting a course of action. His plan was simple yet effective. Rather than sending armed fleets to punish or intimidate, he coordinated resource distribution, repaired damaged infrastructure, and organized local authorities to protect citizens. The result was swift stabilization, minimal disruption, and the preservation of life. The other suitors watched, incredulous. They had expected chaos to continue, yet the humans' calm, deliberate, and ethical actions once again solved the problem better than force could. Even minor beings and local leaders expressed admiration. For the first time, they began to wonder whether humans truly were as weak as the galaxy believed. Elias' actions continued to have an effect beyond immediate problems. His presence inspired those around him to act with care and integrity. Junior officers doubled their attention to detail, researchers took more responsibility for their experiments, and even servants began anticipating needs, motivated by the human's example. Salith noted the change with growing fascination. She realized that Elias had achieved something few could. He had influenced an entire environment without threatening, commanding, or imposing. His strength was invisible to those who expected physical power, yet undeniable to those who understood its value. The suitors, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate. They attempted bribery, coercion, and intimidation, hoping to sway staff or manipulate the princess. Yet Elias remained unshaken. He ignored distractions, refused favors, and acted consistently according to his principles. Finally, an unexpected crisis emerged. A transport vessel carrying critical supplies was sabotaged. It drifted dangerously close to the edge of a planetary atmosphere, its trajectory threatening both the ship and nearby colonies. Panic rippled through the palace. The other suitors immediately demanded the use of force, weapons, and fleets to intercept the ship. Elias, however, proposed a careful maneuver using gravity assists, tethered drones, and calculated propulsion adjustments to redirect the vessel safely. The plan was complex, requiring precise timing, but it minimized risk and ensured the safety of everyone involved. As the operation unfolded, tension gripped the palace. The Molari warlord cursed, predicting failure. Yet Elias remained calm, monitoring every parameter, adjusting calculations, and guiding the process. Slowly, the ship's trajectory stabilized. The vessel was saved without damage, and the colonists remained safe. Salith could only watch in admiration. The human had once again demonstrated that courage, intelligence, and principle could succeed where strength and force had failed. The palace staff celebrated quietly, grateful for the outcome, while the other suitors seethed in humiliation. That evening, Salith approached Elias in the gardens once more. The twin moons reflected softly on the fountains, the flowers glowing with bioluminescent light. "You save lives without weapons," she said. "You guide without commanding. You do not seek glory, and yet you accomplish more than anyone else. Perhaps different from anyone in the galaxy." And as she stood there, watching the human work calmly under the soft light of Zephyra's moons, she felt a certainty growing within her. A certainty that the quiet human, underestimated by all, was extraordinary in ways no one else could match. The palace, once filled with chaos, was now subtly transformed. Staff, scholars, officers, and even some junior suitors began to recognize a new standard. Strength could exist without intimidation, authority without dominance, and courage without violence. And at the center of it all was a human, acting not for recognition, reward, or fear, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The palace was tense that morning. Word had spread quickly. The final decision was to be made. Princess Salith would choose her mate, and the entire galaxy would watch. The suitors, humiliated by repeated failures and the quiet human's steady success, had grown restless. They whispered threats, plotted last-minute schemes, and demanded demonstrations of power. Their eyes darted to Elias, expecting him to falter, expecting the human to reveal some hidden weakness that would justify their scorn. But Elias did not falter. He walked calmly through the palace halls, assisting staff with minor repairs, answering questions about logistics, and quietly observing the final preparations. He had no desire for recognition. His goal had always been simple: to act rightly to protect life and to use knowledge wisely. Salith, observing him from her private chamber, felt a growing certainty. She had seen every suitor, every display of power and cunning, and yet none had impressed her as Elias had. He had demonstrated strength in patience, courage in calmness, and wisdom in understanding consequences. He had acted with principle in crises, guided by empathy rather than ambition, and had consistently protected life where others sought to dominate or destroy. The suitors were summoned to the grand hall for the final audience. The room was enormous, filled with spectators from every corner of the empire. Light panels shimmered across the walls, casting prismatic colors over the assembled crowd. Salith sat at the head of the hall, her expression serene, her eyes focused. Elias stood at a modest distance, his hands at his sides, quietly observing the room and its occupants. The first suitor, the Molari warlord, stepped forward with his usual show of strength. His voice boomed as he recited victories, displayed technologies, and threatened alliances. The crowd watched, impressed by his force, yet Salith remained unmoved. His display was hollow, it lacked depth, empathy, and understanding. The warlord concluded his speech with a demand: choose me or risk instability across the empire. He said nothing, as was his way, and yet his calm presence seemed to draw her attention more strongly than any display of power. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried through the hall. Strength alone does not make a mate worthy. Dominance does not make a ruler admirable. I seek someone who acts rightly, even when no one is watching, and who values life over conquest. They sent psychic impressions of fear, loyalty, and obedience, trying to make her select one of them. Salith closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with a calm intensity. No manipulation can determine my choice. I will not be swayed by force, threat, or illusion. When he spoke, his words were simple, clear, and unassuming. I have no desire for power or favor. I only act according to what is right, and I hope that my actions demonstrate that integrity matters more than force. I choose Ilia's ward. He embodied qualities the galaxy had long overlooked: courage without aggression, wisdom without domination, and strength without arrogance. The crowd erupted in murmurs, but Salith raised a hand, silencing them. Let it be known that strength is not measured by power or fear. True strength is the courage to act rightly, the patience to endure, and the empathy to protect others. Humanity, in its quiet and enduring way, has proven this. I only hope to honor the trust given to me and to serve with integrity. They understood now more than ever that humanity possessed a strength unlike any other species in the galaxy, a strength rooted in perseverance, morality, and intelligence. The Molari warlord, furious and humiliated, attempted to speak, to demand reconsideration. But the Emperor raised a hand, signaling silence. The choice is the Princess S, he said. No one can override it. All others must respect this decision, for it has been made based on merit, not intimidation. Allies of Ilia's and Salith began preparing the ceremonial preparations. Staff and scholars congratulated him quietly, still amazed that one so ordinary in appearance had accomplished so much. His calmness, intelligence, and integrity had not only earned him the princess's favor, but also respect across the empire. Salith approached him as the preparations continued. She studied his face, seeing the same quiet strength that had drawn her attention from the beginning. "You did not seek me," she said softly. "You did not try to impress or manipulate. You only acted rightly. That is why I chose you. I am honored that it has mattered to you." Humans, long underestimated, were suddenly recognized for their resilience, intelligence, and ethical courage. Stories of Ilia's actions during the crises circulated, and many began to reconsider the nature of humanity itself. They were not the weakest species. They were not insignificant. They were enduring, thoughtful, and capable of achieving what others could not, without resorting to destruction or fear. The Suitors, who had once mocked and underestimated him, could only observe in silence. They had measured strength by their own standards: fleets, weapons, psychic abilities, but Ilia's had redefined the standard. Humanity had demonstrated that quiet courage, patience, and moral clarity were more powerful than any weapon or army. In the quiet after the ceremony, Salith and Ilia's walked together through the palace gardens. The twin moons reflected on the fountains, casting soft light across the delicate flowers and crystal pathways. The air was calm, yet charged with the sense of new beginnings. "You have changed this place," Salith said softly. "Not with weapons, not with threats, but with patience, thoughtfulness, and courage. You have inspired others to act rightly, and even those who doubted you have learned something valuable. But perhaps leading by example is stronger than leading by command." Cooperation replaced conflict, careful planning replaced rash action, and the quiet human continued to demonstrate that strength did not require domination, force, or intimidation. Salith and Ilia's worked together, blending their understanding of Zephyrian governance and human insight. Policies were revised to value cooperation over conquest, protection over intimidation, and ethical reasoning over reckless ambition. The empire, once ruled by fear and power alone, began to shift subtly toward a more balanced and enduring future. In distant sectors of the galaxy, observers noted the change. Stories of the quiet human who had outshone the strongest suitors spread. Humans were no longer dismissed as weak or fragile. Instead, they were recognized for their resilience, intelligence, and moral courage. Across planets and star systems, the reputation of humanity began to grow, not through conquest but through example. Salith often stood beside Ilia's, observing his work quietly. She had learned from him as much as he had learned from the palace, and together they exemplified a new ideal: leadership grounded in principle, strength measured by courage and integrity, and influence gained through respect rather than fear. The final lesson was clear to all who watched. The galaxy underestimated humanity at its own risk. Strength was not always loud, victory was not always violent, and the quiet choices of a single human could ripple across worlds, changing the course of civilizations. As the twin moons of Zephyra rose once more over the palace spires, Salith and Elias walked together through the gardens. They spoke softly of plans, of ethics, of cooperation, and of the future. The stars above shimmered as if acknowledging a new era, one where quiet courage, patience, and moral clarity could triumph over brute strength. The other suitors, once arrogant and dismissive, learned the hard lesson that true power is measured not by armies or fear, but by the courage to act rightly, the wisdom to see consequences, and the empathy to protect life. And humanity, represented by a single quiet human, had proven itself a force unlike any the galaxy had anticipated. The galaxy had underestimated them for too long, and now it was clear humans were not merely survivors. They were innovators, protectors, and quietly, unshakably extraordinary. Elias looked at Salith, calm and steady, and she met his gaze. In that moment, all doubt, fear, and convention fell away. The quiet human had been chosen, not by force or display, but by integrity, courage, and quiet strength. And the galaxy, slowly but surely, began to understand what she had always known. The might of humanity could not be measured by weapons, armies, or threats. It could only be witnessed through action, patience, and heart. And in that understanding, a new era began.